forever have blackmail material on me, I suppose.
That's right.
Release the tapes.
If social media continues, we'll all be equally blackmailable, and so maybe no one will pull the trigger.
Exactly.
But Colin, why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself? We've never really talked before, except on Twitter.
Yeah, so I'm from Sacramento, California. That's where I was born.
Cool.
Which is where you live right now.
Yep.
I was born there. I was basically raised there my whole life. Family was just, I guess, non-religious overall. Really great family, very small family. Maybe in my early 20s, late teens, I started kind of really getting into science and Carl Sagan, and I read, I kind of went to the new atheist path early on there. That was kind of my group. I had my angry atheist years. I like to think I've mellowed out quite a bit, and I cringe looking back at some old blog posts I used to write. So, yeah, but I still see those in the wild now, here and there. But
why were you angry? What was behind angry atheism? Angry at what?
So it wasn't okay. It was mainly. So I was really into evolutionary biology.
Okay.
And it was around that time when Dawkins and Harris and everyone was first starting to come to prominence, is when you saw a bunch of actual like challenges to school curricula, trying to get evolution out of schools, and there were just the boilerplate young Earth creationist argument that teach both sides, intelligent design, that type of stuff. And it's like, people want to believe that it's fine, but it's. I was very adamant about keeping these things out of the scientific classroom, and so that was the main threat I saw to science and evolution in particular, was kind of coming from the religious right, and so that's kind of where my anger was stemming from. These arguing with these types of people online. It wasn't so much just arguing about purely theological points. I mean, I would argue that with people as well. But it was mainly the practical application of some beliefs to, real world things like science and evolutionary biology and school curricula, that type of thing. So that was, I think, the fuel for some of my anger early on. Okay. And probably also just because I was a teenager and I was, everyone goes through a phase where they're a little angrier and rebellious. So, but I mean, I'm less angry, although I still hold many of the same, the foundational beliefs that I had back then.
Okay.
I think a lot of I've written about this before, where I think a lot of that threat to science has kind of faded on the right to some degree. I mean, it's still there. There's still young Earth creationists. I don't know why I don't see them online. Maybe we're just, maybe just social media bubbles have just created these other worlds. So they could actually be just flourishing perfectly well. It's actually very disturbing now that I think about that. But
Facebook and Twitter have just segregated them. So
yeah, they're gonna come back like some forgotten civilization that's just multiplied out of control. They're gonna come over the mountain, but, and they could. But I don't see the same challenges, I guess, to evolutionary biology specifically, because that's my field. That's something that's close to my heart. And so when I see attacks on evolution, that's when I get defensive about things.
Okay.
And so I don't see that so much on the right anymore, but I do see that, strangely enough, coming from what I view as, what do you want to call it? Authoritarian left, social justice left, whatever, progressive, any word you want to throw at it that's common now. That's where I see as the main source of some of this anti-evolutionism and just anti-biology in general. I guess it's okay. More than just evolution at this point. So yeah, that's my long answer to where the anger come from.
Okay. So you went to high school in Sacramento. Where'd you go to college?
So I went to Del Oro High School in Loomis. I don't know if you know where that is. Yeah, and then I went to Sierra Community College in Rockland.
Yeah, I know where that is too.
Yeah, and then I transferred from there to UC Davis as a evolutionary biology major.
Okay.
Then from there, I spent a year working. I worked for Bayer/Monsanto, doing a crop pest work there. Working in an insect lab. But then I went to grad school. I actually started at the University of Pittsburgh. But then my lab moved back to California. My advisor took a job at UC Santa Barbara, and so our whole lab kind of went back to California. And so I actually got to graduate from UCSB, which was a much better university than Pittsburgh, at least for my degree anyway. So that worked out really well.
And a beautiful campus.
Yeah, oh my goodness. The best years of my life were there. But then fate somehow brought me back to Pennsylvania. I never thought I'd come back here. And I was in Pittsburgh, and Pittsburgh as a city is not so bad, but I just don't like the weather. I don't like Pennsylvania. So as I was like driving away from Pennsylvania back to California to go to UCSB, I remember like you were now leaving Pennsylvania sign. I just gave it the middle finger, like never coming back here. And then I got punished. I was too cocky, and now the only job offer I got after grad school was Penn State University. So I had to drive all the way back to even more rural, middle of nowhere Pennsylvania. So
wow,
it's not so bad here, but it's a really good job. But all my family and friends are back in California, so it's just kind of a tough situation living out here just alone in the middle of.
Yeah. Well, I grew up in New Jersey, and then I went to Calvin College in Michigan. So we always drove through Pennsylvania. Okay. And what I'm about to say will get me in trouble with people from New Jersey. But coming from New Jersey, Pennsylvania always looked beautiful. But then again, I had never been to California, and I'd certainly never seen Santa Barbara. So
yeah, I mean, I think that Pennsylvania is beautiful when it's like lush and green. But then you get the humidity, you get the cold, and you only get like maybe a month where it's just like dry and like you can go outside in a light sweater or something. So.
Well, you certainly do get spoiled by the weather out here, and
Oh my goodness, yeah, especially Santa Barbara. Like you don't even look at the forecast. Just like scattered clouds, 73 degrees. Like okay.
Every day. Yeah, I've got my youngest son goes to UC Santa Cruz, and again another just gorgeous campus. Beautiful, beautiful mountain covered with redwoods overlooking the Pacific every day. Beautiful. It's like, wow, not quite as warm as Santa Barbara, but
yeah. Santa Cruz, that's a place I almost went for undergrad as well, but I kind of had my eyes set on UC Davis for their evolution program.
Okay.
So it was a little above.
So I'm interested in talking to you because one of the things I don't like is echo chambers, and most of the people who contact me already like my channel, and so they want to talk to me. And so I want to talk to someone with at least a little bit of a divergent view on some of these things compared to a lot of the people that talk to me.
I love it. For sure.
A lot of the people that talk to me, they aren't necessarily religious. A lot of the people that watch my channel aren't religious, but they're interested in some of the same issues. So via the James Lindsay and Peter Boghossian and Helen Pluckrose, that whole movement. Do you see in real life or just on social media resistance to science and biology?
Do I see it in real life? Yeah. Strangely enough, even in my own biology departments when I was in grad schools. I mean, I went to Pittsburgh. And I was watching undergrad presentations on things of it was just feminist science, which is supposed to be just a new way to like impose certain cultural narratives to scientific questions, where it's just like it's just science. Why do you have to? It's meant to like counterbalance what they perceive to be as like an inherently masculinized science, without demonstrating what particular is wrong with like the science it is, and they just add like a counterweight without even verifying that there's a weight that needs to be countered. So I saw presentations like that. A lot of people in my departments would just kind of go full deconstructionist, and I have a lot of friends who are anthropology majors. These are anthropology PhD students. And we can't talk about anything. We talk about the concept of race, or even just like genetic related clusters of populations. And they don't even accept that. They don't even accept, just basic hereditary groups, because maybe there's no single trait that is going to like completely separate one group for another. And that's kind of this univariate fallacy that people are using these days to kind of deconstruct biological realities. So they'll say, because there's not like, you can't point to one single trait that these two groups, have that separates them neatly, therefore none of these categories exist. Even though you get population biologists and they can construct these models using many, many different genes and traits, and they can show that like, oh, there's genetic structure coming, over here in the Philippines, or in India, and even inside countries like India, you can see genetic structure between the different castes that they have. So I mean, there's real variation there, but due to some of these PC narratives they have, they just cannot bring themselves to acknowledge these things. And in these same anthropology students, it's mainly anthropology. I don't want to act like I'm just like crapping on them, but I wouldn't crap on them if it wasn't always coming from them in my point of view. But they're even ones that are basically going for the social construction narrative on things like biological sex itself. And they'll fall back again and say, we'll point to this single one trait that definitively separates males from females in every single category. And it's just like, well, I mean, you can't just pick one trait. So, and then they use that as the basis for, obliterating the categories to speak of. We can't even talk about these concepts because, they're just not real. It's just our minds, creating these categories where they don't exist. And it's been at every university I've been to, even within the scientists that I've known, mainly in grad students. I don't know how prevalent it is among faculty. I assume probably less. But there's a lot of politically active graduate students that I worry are just kind of having their science take a backseat to some of their ideologies. So it's not so bad here at Penn State, actually. I haven't run into it, but I don't get to interact with undergrads as much here, or even grad students, because I'm a postdoc here now. So it could be more prevalent than it is, but I haven't seen much evidence of it here. I know supposedly if you go more east towards like Boston and stuff, it gets a bit worse.
Do you think this is a bigger threat to science than, let's say, what you saw from the creationists, the young Earth creationists?
100%. I've even said this before, that like I would rather it's creationism that's just spreading, because the way that this is getting a hold, it's in the academy now, and it's kind of eating it from within. Whereas the threat from creationists, I mean, you had the occasional, creationist or intelligent designer who was in a bio department, like Michael B. He's out there. I don't know if Stephen Myers is he in a scientist at a university? I'm not sure, but they were just they were islands in their departments basically, and it wasn't a threat to the departments and the science as a whole. Whereas now I do see it as sort of this insidious kind of this malignancy that's in the academy that could potentially, erode it from within. Because just in my departments, I knew my advisor well. He knows what I thought about things. But, even before I was going to publish my Quillette article, my advisor told me, if I publish it, I should probably not put my name on it. It should be a pseudonym. And then really? I had another mentor I had. He gave me a call, and he was just extremely worried. He said, don't even publish this thing anonymously, because they'll find out who you are. And so it was just, I had to just kind of have a moment to myself and ask, the one thing no one was criticizing who I'd sent my article to was the validity of it and the facts that whether or not they were true. It was always these external, like, you can't put it out there because it could ruin your career, and you're trying to get, your postdoc now, but you're trying to be competitive for faculty jobs. And so, just wait till you get a faculty job, and then you can, speak your mind. Or, and then I was looking down the road, and it's like, well, if I get a faculty job, then I still have 6 more years when I'm trying to get tenure. And so, like, well, then the stakes are even higher then. I have way more to lose then if I'm speaking up. And so, and I have no idea how long my postdoc's going to be. So I'm looking at a decade of self-censoring before I can actually speak my mind. And then I have people say, like, well, tenure is not even the same as it used to be. It's not even, it can't even help you. So then it's just like, okay, well, so I have to choose between like this life of just like narrowly focusing on my discipline, which I mean, I work with social spiders and ants and wasps, which are awesome. I love studying them. I would love to study them for my whole life, but like, I don't want my intellectual like environment to be nothing but ants, wasps, and spiders. Like I think much more broadly than that. I'm interested in sort of science as a whole and sort of like the meta narratives about science and these like that, and attacks to science, and what does it mean to have an epistemology, and how do you know when things are true? And so these are just I'm into the big questions. I mean, I got into evolutionary biology in the first place because I thought that evolution was one of the few sciences that really kind of get at those deep questions on who we are, where we came from, explains our behavior in a certain types of context that we can look at. It's a lens where you can really peer into look at our present condition based on the conditions we might have had in the past. And so it's a very, I think, a very philosophically rich discipline to get into if you choose to make it that way. Now there's some people who are just they just calculate allele frequencies per different generations, and they're evolutionary biologists, and they're not necessarily philosophical in that sense. But I'm interested in the philosophical side. That's what got me into evolutionary biology in the first place, because of how it addresses what I think is these fundamental questions, I suppose.
Well, you just gave me three things that I'm interested in right away. The first was that I noted that your strategy, the strategy proposed to you by your advisor, is the same as the strategy posed to, let's say, Christians who imagine they want to work their way up a political system, and they got to keep quiet about their faith until you get to the top, and then you'll talk about it. That's always a really bad idea, because the truth is that if you have to keep quiet in order to try to gain power, you're going to have to keep quiet in order to try to keep power. So I think you've got some wisdom there. So that's a very interesting thing. I want to come back to the philosophical thing, but tell me about the social spiders and ants and wasps. That sounds so cool. Tell me about that.
They're super awesome. So like my dissertation was on social spiders. I had never heard about them until I just applied to work in that lab as well. I always thought I'd work with honeybees or ants probably, and I work with ants now. But the lab I joined, they had a lot of funding, and it was a fairly new lab, and they worked with several species of social spider. The ones I worked on are it's a species called Stegodipus demicola. They're in southern Africa, and as far as social spiders go, they're pretty large. They can, when they're adults, their butts can be about as big as like a jelly belly or something like that. So they're pretty large spiders, and they can be in colonies anywhere up to about, ranging between sometimes 10 individuals up to 1,000 individuals in a single colony. So they build these big like three-dimensional silk retreats that are just so dense. They're all just like leather. You can barely get inside of them. And they have all these like tunnels all throughout these retreats. And then from these retreats, they have all these two-dimensional capture webs that are sort of radiating in all directions from it. And so they spend their time in these retreats, and then as soon as something gets caught in the capture web, all those vibrations go back to the retreat, and then they're all just recruited out in like a team. There's almost like a pride of lions that's like attacking something, because it's all orchestrated. Like they'll each grab like an antenna, one will grab a leg, and they'll just like pull it until like when they inject a venom in its legs. And so what I was interested in this species, so I study animal personalities. So that means what you probably intuitively think about personality, that differences between individuals and the way that they behave consistently over time. And we usually think about this in the context of humans or our pets. If you have two dogs, they're not going to behave the same way. And so this is kind of how we intuitively think about it. But usually in nature, people would always look at like individual differences in behavior and just kind of treat it as this like background noise, that it's not really important for describing any really big phenomena, until they actually started measuring this in a lot of different animals, and shows that these differences in behavior are actually the ways that some single species can partition their environment in terms of like what types of resources they're getting or how they interact with other animals. And then if you look within like a social group, well, then we notice one thing you notice inside basically any social animal that you'll ever study is that they tend to have much higher degrees of personality variation within their colonies than you'd expect, that you see in just populations of solitary individuals like deer or maybe communal organisms. And so what a lot of these animal societies do is they have all this behavioral variation, and a lot of times this is actually correlated with which jobs individuals are doing inside their colony. So they structure, task participation, division of labor is often based on just cryptic traits like, how aggressive a certain individual is. Some colonies might have a continuous distribution. It's, you can range anywhere from really docile or really aggressive or really bold and really shy. But then some groups will have, a strictly like binary set where like there's only aggressive and really docile individuals and there's no one in between. And then we can we'll get like a big colony of spiders. We'll break it all apart, isolate every single spider, test all the behavior of every single individual. And then we can like create artificial societies. Like I can make a whole spider colony composed of like 100%, aggressive spiders, or 100% shy spiders and docile ones, and then any mixture that I want. I can play God with these little societies, and then you can see how does changing their behavioral composition influence things like reproduction, how well they tend to their young, how well they cooperate to capture prey and repair their webs, and basically anything that matters for the life of a social spider. And so that's basically what my dissertation was on. It was looking at that, and then also how that matters in the context of being raided by predatory ants, for instance. So if their personality changes in the presence of things like fear, so different environmental stimuli and how that influences group decisions and things like that. So that's in a nutshell.
That sounds like outrageous fun.
It is. I mean, so doing the actual like behavioral tests on the spiders themselves couldn't be more boring. But like once you get the colonies up and running, because sometimes it can be 2 weeks of nothing but like 10-hour, 15-hour days of just testing individual spiders. But once they're all tested and you have all the experimental colonies set up, when you're actually starting to collect real data, then that's definitely the fun part. And they're really the system is so amenable to writing really interesting scientific papers, because there's such interesting narratives and kind of I don't want to say like stories, but you can construct more or less straightforward narratives about how these things work and why and why they might not match populations in nature, and they're pretty fun to write. So and because I did a lot of work with like ant raids on spiders, you can have cool titles like Warring Arthropod Societies. Like I literally have a paper called that, and people tend to like it. It's a good educational tool because it's just intuitively interesting to most people like right away, and the concept of animal personality doesn't have a big, there's not a big hurdle to understand that. So it's a really great system to just get people interested in science, and it's also good to just do as a scientist forever. So that's what I plan on doing.
It sounds like computer games I used to play, in terms of I always liked.
Oh, exactly.
Maybe it's because I'm a pastor. I always like the God games, where you set up a thing and see how it goes. So I'm really interested in. So now I can connect to the philosophical thing. So when you talk about a narrative, so you test. I can't even imagine how you test a spider's personality. I mean. Yeah.
So I mean, it's cruder than like, so with humans you can like give them questionnaires and things like that. But for spiders, it has to be more sort of obvious traits. So you can look at something like how aggressive they are, like how do they respond to certain like an aggressive stimulus in their environment. So for our spiders, we look at a trait that's called boldness, which is basically just sort of a measure of the propensity of an individual to engage in risky behavior to some degree. It's are you a bold individual? And some people measure this as a measure of like maybe neophobia, like they'll put a novel object in their environment that they've never encountered before, and maybe they'll put like a little reward on this novel object and see how long it takes for them to approach this strange object in their environment. And individuals will differ consistently in how willing they are to approach novel objects, which could it could be a good or a bad. They don't know. This unknown factor, which boldness then like is measurable. With our spiders, we do a test where we puff them with air, and that causes them to pull their legs in, and they'll huddle, and they'll just kind of remain motionless. Because when the air is disturbed around them, it's not very common in their environment because they're usually inside like a retreat. So when there's an air disturbance, that usually means that there's some predator nearby or something large is close. And so they'll huddle, and they'll kind of like do a death feint. And then spiders vary consistently in how quickly they'll emerge from this death feint and begin to move about normally. So spiders that you puff them, they'll like death feint for like a second, and they'll just like start walking normally. Those will be considered really bold. And then some will just stay in that huddle for a long time, and they won't even get out of it until the end of the experiment. So we consider those to be shy spiders, basically.
So do you then do a colony with really bold spiders and really shy spiders and see how they both perform? And
yeah, exactly.
And so what have you learned?
So
is diversity good? Here's a question.
Yeah, it really depends, actually. So we had most of our experiments that we've done, they were in a laboratory setting, and they always showed that, and in the field as well, when we did like field foraging tests, we always found that the proportion of bold spiders in your colony is directly related to both how quickly the spider is going to respond to prey in their webs, and how many individuals are recruited to the capture web when they're attacking prey. So we simulate these attacks by getting like a small piece of paper, and we'll put it in their capture web, and then we get this like a literal like sex toy vibrator with a wire on the end of it, and then we'll vibrate this piece of paper in their webs, and then that'll cause the spiders to attack it, because it mimics like a winged prey item that's struggling in their webs.
Right.
You used to see the papers we write, because we have to actually describe the instruments we're using, and so we have a scientific paper, and it's just like we used handheld vibratory device, and we have to put the make and model, and I think the most used was a Go Vibe by Fun Factory, and it's right there in the scientific paper. It's getting cited. Yeah, we use those, and so that's how we measure their basically the colony like aggressiveness overall. And so we see that if you have a lot more really bold spiders, those colonies tend to attack much faster and with way more individuals than really shy colonies. But then when you look at colonies in nature, they tend to be of mixed composition. So if in all the context in the lab, we see bold colonies outperforming all the other compositions, like why don't we see these bold compositions in nature? And then I did an experiment where I wanted to see how they responded to predator cues, because they do this interesting behavior, because these spider colonies are constantly raided by this really, really voracious ant. It's called the pugnacious ant, and it's just like everywhere. It's so rabid, and it only eats meat. And in some areas, these spider colonies can like experience up to like 90% extinction rates just over 1 year just from these ant raids. And we noticed that when these ants are in their capture webs, you'll see the spiders, they won't attack the ants right away. They'll kind of start making this special kind of silk, and you can see them doing it. It's a whole different type of behavior, and it's this silk called cribellate silk. And it's basically just like a really tangly silk that normally they use to like line their capture webs because it's good for ensnaring prey. But in the context of an ant raid, what they're doing is they're creating these like tangly web barriers that are put up to try to keep the ants from advancing into their retreats. And so you can see just sort of these waves of cribellate making behavior occur when these ants begin their raids. And so I wanted to see if personality variation in the colonies is related to like which individuals are making these silk walls, basically. And we found that the mixed colonies actually performed the best in terms of how many individuals are participating in this interesting defensive behavior. And the bold colonies actually were just all over the map. Sometimes all the colony would do it, sometimes like nobody would do it. Like from trial to trial, there was almost no consistency in how they behave towards these ant raids. Whereas the mixed colonies were both, 3 times higher and very consistent all the way across. And so, we don't know for sure, but this could be a plausible explanation for why we don't see bold colonies in nature. If they're not able to respond, consistently to a very consistent and dangerous threat, then that would be a problem. So maybe they're sacrificing a little bit on the how quickly we attack prey side of things in order to, better defend ourselves against raids, which, are extremely prevalent, at least prevalent enough in their evolutionary history where they have this interesting, stereotyped behavior that they do only when this ant is in their web. We've thrown other ants in their webs that are the same size, but are like seed predators, and so not a threat to our ant colonies. And the ant colony and the spider colonies don't respond in that same way. They don't make the walls. They just attack it like a beetle or something. So
how do these spiders differentiate between the ants?
Their world is almost entirely vibrational, but it seems bizarre that they could be able to detect like the small differences in the identity between species of ants. So it could be a combination of either they just have a different vibrational stimulus when they're struggling in the web, or maybe there could be a chemical component. And there is some evidence that they are able to respond to chemical cues, because I did an experiment where I had those pugnacious ants sort of beneath their colony. They couldn't access their colony, but they were like trapped in like a space between 2 cups and with holes in the bottom of the cup. So like the ant cues could just like, permeate throughout the cup containing all the spiders, and the spiders would reduce. Therefore, they would become way more cautious in those treatments, even if they had never like encountered an ant, one of these dangerous ants. So they appear, it's probably a combination of chemical cues and also vibratory cues, because the ants are releasing these alarm pheromones as well to recruit more ants. So it could be that the spiders are picking up on these same pheromones as well, as a kind of a cue to what this thing is in the web.
Wow, that's just fascinating. Now, here's
I can't
a
believe
question.
they pay me to do this.
Well, it is so cool. It is really so cool.
It's pretty fun.
So here's a question. So these spiders have personalities, and now again we have a question of whether that's the right word for them. That's probably the best word we have for it.
That's gotten a lot of pushback in some papers. We define it in our papers as like, consistent differences between individual over time and context. So like when we call that personality, but some people like to call it temperament, things like that, so personality, they constantly say that's too anthropomorphizing.
Yeah.
But we use the word personality. I mean, it basically, I don't know, it seems intuitive that that's what it is. I mean, we when we talk about human personality, we say like, if this guy's a jerk, it means he's a jerk now and he's probably a jerk tomorrow, and that's just something about them. And they're consistently behave a certain way, over different, over time.
Or at least there's some sort of pattern it's a behavioral
consistency that's
so
that's what we're measuring. I think it makes sense, and it makes it more, I guess, I think it's better for the general public too, because it's an intuitive thing, and it's not too far away from what we're actually seem to be measuring. So we put our foot down and we use the word.
So what if we were to talk about the consciousness of these spiders? Is that a word we could use?
It's a tough word. I mean, they'll talk about their cognition and just like what sort of comprises their entire sensory environment, which can differ from species to species. because for spiders are sort of interesting in a way because they almost completely like interface with their environment. So at least the spiders I have that I study, and some other spiders too, is their sensory input doesn't just stop at the end of their bodies. I mean, their webs are quite literally these extended phenotypes of their bodies, and they basically sit in their webs, and they use the webs as just basically this microphone, this super sensitive microphone for everything that's going on in their webs. And there's some orb weaver spiders that they can detect just the faintest vibration and identify what's in the web. Is it just a leaf that fell in my web I need to get out of it because it's gonna tear a hole in my web? Is it a male that's approaching me? They can distinguish if it's the same species, or if it's another female that's going to challenge me for my web, or if it's a male. They can distinguish the sex of the spider that's coming on there. They can distinguish if it's the same species or not. They can detect if the prey item is dangerous or not. So they're so finely attuned to like these different vibrations in their webs, and just the way that these interface with their environment. So yeah, they have a whole different called like the Umwelt of the spider, the totality of their sensory experience, I suppose. So it's interesting, definitely interesting topic. I'm actually writing a paper, like I was just doing that before, on the ways that these social spiders respond to different types of vibrations. So hopefully that'll come out soon.
It's just fascinating now. And before you were talking about, I mean, obviously they, well, I don't know, obviously, I mean, how much can we really know what life is to, this spider and what it's, I mean, and what their capacity is to, I mean, we use imagination, even when we're talking about this spider. I mean, these areas of our brains are using imagination to, in a sense, model. And I know nothing. I didn't even know what these things look like. I just have what you've told me. And then of course I'm constructing images, not really thinking in images. I'm constructing images based on this, and then you get these, narratives of it. And you're, I mean, even I suppose if these are from South America and you transport them and you keep them in some environment in the lab, then of course you've got obviously an artificially controlled environment in the lab, which of course changes the animals too.
Yeah, for sure.
Wow. So earlier you said you really got into evolutionary biology because of of kind of the philosophical, or of what interest of it gave you a degree of certainty. What was that for you?
I wouldn't call it a degree of certainty. It's just that, from the beginning of life on Earth, basically, we had to pass through all these intermediate forms. We had to get here, through this process of natural selection. So the way we perceive our world is going to be affected by, this process. The way we behave subconsciously, this consciousness itself is essentially, it's all been constructed by this process. And the more we know about this process, is the more we're going to be able to detect the effects of, natural selection in shaping our behavior, and shaping our bodies, and shaping our interactions with people, in that sense, I suppose. So yeah, that's sort of what I'm getting at.
The thing that always fascinates me about how, and we all talk this way, is when we use the first person plural with this, because even that, and say, okay, when we say, how we developed, so here's this we, and it's like,
I guess it just mean humans in general, or
well, even because I mean, I've always been a lover of nature television. So when PBS showed anything nature, PBS type, I watched as a kid growing up, and I couldn't get enough of it. But at some point I began listening to them. I thought, we were on the African savannah, and it's like,
wait, I wasn't there.
Well, exactly. And so well, these were our ancestors, sort of, and so then and so this we-ness, and now, obviously with the culture war, so we here we are. We don't have any other word to use, but so I'm a white guy whose great grandparents came to America in the 1890s from the northwest reaches of the Netherlands. But because I'm white, we held slaves, and it's like there's and by gender. So then you get into these categories by identity, and so it just strikes me that there are these constructs that we have that we so seamlessly employ in talking about these kinds of things that I have zero idea what to make of it. I've never.
Yeah, I would say I reject a lot of it on the grounds that you mentioned, sort of like when we get down to like our identity groups. As soon as we start splitting up individuals and hold, say, like white people responsible for slave ownership, because I didn't own any slaves and you didn't either. So when I talk about the we in like an evolutionary sense, and you even mentioned it, how people talked about like when we were on the savannah, like the way I interpret that a little bit too is like the savannah in some way is still with us today, because there are adaptations that occurred in all these different environments going back and back and back that are still carried over. And it's not just, there's no time when it's just like, it's not just an etch-a-sketch, you just shake and like, it's a new thing. It's built on previous forms. And so adaptations that we've gained in certain environments, they're carried forward. They can be lost and shaped in certain ways, but those things they're still, I guess, with us in a way. So in a way that, part of us was shaped by that savannah, or whatever environment you're going to talk about in the past. That's the kind of way I interpret these like deep history, like we were there type of thing, at least in an evolutionary sense.
Yeah. Now I'm really interested about this adaptation with the building the silk walls when this particular ant comes into the current idea of why this adaptation developed. I mean, it's a very, how on earth does that happen with a spider? I mean, its brain isn't that big, but and you would also think that the communities, if these ants are so voracious, there wouldn't be survivors that someone would say, we got this silk, and I wonder if we could, that's of course how humans humans process.
Yeah, I mean, it could just be, before these species interacted. I mean, they've probably shared environments for millions of years. So I mean, they're already making cribellate silk in some contexts, and sometimes it takes just like one spider to build it in a different context that had an incremental influence on on making the colony last that much longer, or lasting the next day. Because sometimes you'll get like an ant raid that'll happen, but it'll happen like later in the day, and the colony it's going to be completely wiped out. But like nightfall comes, and then the ants no longer forage at nighttime. They go away, and then sometimes in the next day, ants don't come back. They're just they forgot about where they were, and so
even that. Just think about that. I mean, we don't even know why we forget things, and then we watch this behavior and we say, "Well, the ants forgot," and it's like, wonder what that means.
yeah. But I don't know the exact trajectory of how a entire species gets to to all take on this behavior, but they're all like super inbred and close related. So definitely, like if there's any traits that's going to matter for certain individuals, they tend to spread really fast from generation to generation, because they're practically clones. which also adds a whole different layer to it, because if they're almost clones, like how do you get all this behavioral variation that appears to be heritable in the species too?
Yeah.
So that's a bizarre adaptation, that they can be so genetically similar, but yet so behaviorally diverse. Bizarre. Yeah, and also these, we've looked at, well, we have different scientists. I'm using we now in terms of like old scientists who did stuff that I had no part in. I guess we as in people who study this species. They looked at environments where this spider coexists and then doesn't coexist with this ant species. In environments where they coexist, the spiders will actually sort of prophylactically create these those silken barriers on like the attachment points of their capture webs to like the surrounding substrate, to like presumably keep the ants from even like getting on their capture web in the first place. But in the environments where the ranges don't overlap, you don't see these barriers on the attachment points. They're just not there. So it's, this could be like something that evolves maybe quickly as the different populations are moving around, or if they're getting chemical cues, maybe that triggers them to create these barriers. But super interesting. Yeah.
How do new colonies form?
Yeah, so they can form several ways. So the most common way is for them to just it's called bridging. So you'll have one big colony, and it'll get, it'll start getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and it'll get to a certain mass where there's just so many spiders, and the capture web can only be so big, there's a point of diminishing returns for food collection and feeding the colony. So they'll basically send out like a little strand of silk. It'll attach onto like a neighboring bush, sometimes a few feet away, sometimes a meter away, sometimes like another just a bush 10 feet away. And then a group of spiders will then just sort of move from one colony to another location, and then they'll just start a new retreat over there. And they'll often share a big capture web too. They just have different nodes now. And so you'll come across these, like, I don't even know how, there's not really any data on how old these colonies on a single bush can last, but you'll see like sometimes a whole tree that's just like covered with node to node to node with upwards of 50 of these colonies, and they're all like, all the capture webs are being shared between all of them. It's just like this huge like spider metropolis. It's like ridiculous. Wow. And so yeah, we don't know like how long does it take like a gene and for the spider on this side of the tree to even like make it to the other side. Like are the spiders moving like through the entire, or do they have sort of a home base in the retreat they were born in? Like people don't know any about this stuff.
And how do they decide who's going to go? I mean, because actually a Christian Reformed church used to plant churches that way. So they get too many people in one church. It's like, oh, we need another church. So then they start Second Christian Reformed Ripon. Well, we need a new name. Let's not be second, because they've already got first. So we'll call it Emmanuel. So
yeah.
Then, people who are a little less satisfied with the pastor, they go over, start this new church, and they call a different pastor. And, it's just fascinating to me.
Yeah, I don't know which ones are the ones that are going to be participating in the bridging, but if I've thought about that before, and like if I had to hypothesize anything, it'd be probably the bold ones, because they're going to like a new, it's a new environment, that whole neophobia type thing. So they can either bridge, or sometimes they can also do something that's called ballooning. So when they're you can get this usually in adult females that are gravid, so they're ready to lay eggs. They'll basically send out like a bunch of silk on a particular windy day, and then the silk will just catch wind, and then they'll just let go of the substrate, and then they'll just fly off into the wind, and wherever they land is where they decide to just build their new colony. And it's probably the most dangerous form of it, because it's not an active migration; it's completely passive by the wind. You could there's a lot of bushes around in some environments, so you might land on a good bush, or you could land on the ground, and these spiders don't do well on the ground. So that's another way they do it. That's probably how they, the long distance dispersal for different habitats. But yeah, usually those is either bridging or ballooning, basically what they got going on.
See, I listen to this stuff and I think cosmological argument, because I think, look at how much we as human beings know we can't make these spiders. I mean, we can, I mean,
Not yet.
Someone is, yeah, not yet. It's eschatology. Yeah, someday we'll be able to make these spiders. But it is just so, it is just so amazing. And this is just a spider, an obscure spider that I've never seen or heard of before.
Yeah, just random. If you were in South Africa looking for these things, like, you wouldn't even believe what their nests look. They look like someone just like wiped a giant booger on a plant. Like their nests are just like, it just looks like maybe a trash bag got caught in a tree, but it's just like they're just these silken, like, bleh, they look terrible. They're filthy. They have no hygienic behavior. Their webs are just littered with carcasses. When we tear open their retreats, there's just beetle parts and everything, and they're just filthy animals. But they work, and they live in like the most intense environment in South Africa. They're in the middle of the Kalahari Desert. We've even found them in the Namib. There's a little bush in the middle of nowhere, zero precipitation, just dunes everywhere else, and here's this thriving spider colony. And they're basically just like, they're environmental, like, filter feeders. They're almost like the equivalent of coral, I guess, but on land, because they're just, they're sending out they got their capture webs, and if anything that happens to fly into it, that's what they're getting.
Wow. That is just so cool.
Yeah. Like you'll be in areas, you'll be like, there's no way we're going to find spiders here. It is like 120 degrees out here in the middle of the desert. And then lo and behold, you'll just find like this spider Shangri-La that's just like, well, this is nothing else to live here except for these things. It's amazing.
Wow. So I've occupied a lot of your time. We could talk about more stuff. I don't know how much time that you have. I see, the problem with me is I got the interesting gene, and I'm just interested in everything. And so
I probably got like another hour if you do.
All right, yeah. My wife she's working, so she has. So if I didn't talk about Jordan Peterson on my channel, some people would unsubscribe. So, and you and I talked a little bit about the Peterson Harris talks. Did you see any of that or all of that?
Yeah, I saw all of them. Yeah, and
so what did you think?
I rewatched some of them not too long ago. Yeah, I really enjoyed those talks. Like, some people didn't get much from them or something, or they say they talked past one another, but I thought actually a lot was achieved. I don't know if achieved is the right word, but I got a really good understanding of, I think, maybe I don't, we'll see. But
it's been a little while
of sort of where they're coming from. I think I have a better idea of Peterson than I did way before that. Yeah, I thought Brett Weinstein was a great moderator for that whole series. Yeah, I thought it was.
So tell me about what you learned and what you thought, because I'm really curious. I did a lot of video on that, and even since then I've watched parts of it again, and my estimation of what was achieved.
It's such a broad question. Like, what did I think of it?
I ask open-ended questions because it works well with people. People talk about what they want to talk about anyway, so might as well.
Yeah. I'll probably come not as a surprise to you, but I agreed with Harris almost completely.
Okay.
With what he was saying. I understand, I think what Jordan Peterson is saying, but I feel that I can sort of interpret what he's saying in a way that doesn't conflict with what I think about the world. I think he sees a lot of the same things that Harris. I think they have almost like identical concerns, but I just think that like the layer they're putting over the interpretive structure they're putting around these things, at least is quite different. But I think they're both able to be distilled to the same things in almost every way. When I look at it, when I hear Peterson talk about things, I could just reinterpret them in sort of what I would call, I guess, like a secular way or something. I don't know if that's enough to go with.
Well, what do you think Sam Harris's goal was, besides, make money or anything like that? What do you think Sam Harris's goal was? Did you listen to any of the Sam Harris podcasts before the two Sam Harris podcasts before the thing? Okay.
Yeah.
What do you think Sam Harris's goal was, and what do you think Jordan Peterson's goal was?
I think that they're both, at least in my estimation, really honest actors in the whole debate scene. I think, when you get past, they got paid to do it. When you get past that, I think it's probably a combination of trying to just understand where each other is coming from, because there is some overlap in their audiences. I know Sam has felt that a lot of his fans have become sort of enchanted with Jordan Peterson in a way that he didn't understand why. And there's a lot of Jordan Peterson fans that, and that like Harris to some degree. And, and I'm sort of one of those Sam Harris. Like, Sam Harris is one of my favorite, thinkers, public intellectuals, I guess. And I'm a Jordan Peterson fan. Like, I don't want to come across as like someone who doesn't like Jordan Peterson. I think he is excellent in many contexts. I've always just sort of veered away from when he starts talking about religion and Christianity and truth and some aspects of morality, but I think he's actually on a similar page with Harris. They just have sort of different intuitions. So what was Harris's goal? I think it was just to understand where Jordan Peterson's coming from, and maybe to address this disconnect that I think that Harris has, and what I also shared between Jordan Peterson and his audience a little bit. Because that's a criticism that I had before that debate was set up, and that I know some people had as well, is that in my view, Jordan Peterson, I don't think he's being dishonest or anything like that, but I feel that when he talks about Christianity and religion, he's using these Christian words, this Christian symbolism, and this is being interpreted by people who have vastly different ideas of God, of the afterlife. When I heard Peterson talk for the first time about religion, I just remember thinking, like, I've never heard anybody talk about Christianity in this way. And then I see a lot of people who I know hold more, fundamentalist beliefs, who love Jordan Peterson, and I'm saying, what do you mean? Like, you don't even have the same idea of what God is. Like, I always had a feeling that there's just a lack of, like, the people think Jordan Peterson is in agreement with them when he's actually not. That's kind of like, in a way, let me see if I can put this. Like, so when Jordan Peterson talks about God, I've sort of come up with an analogy. Let's say that a bunch of people in the world, if you go to like a UFO convention, okay? And they're like Little Green Men UFO convention, where everyone believes extraterrestrials have visited the Earth.
Roswell. They've got him at Roswell.
Yeah, I went to Roswell actually not that long ago.
Did you see him?
I didn't. I mean, they could have been like walking around, but they could have had like flesh suits on. I don't know. But I can imagine going to like a convention where everyone is just like a hardcore fundamentalist, like UFO person, got the UFO hats on and all that stuff. And then if someone comes into there to give a talk and they talk about UFOs in a way that, the person giving the talk doesn't believe in Little Green Men UFOs. They believe in the literal, like, unidentified flying objects, something like that. But then they're using terminology of the UFO community of, we've been being visited, or like, they landed in my backyard. This can be like, it could be like a spiritual landing. But when you actually get down to it,
spiritual landing.
Yeah, like,
they landed in my heart.
yeah, like you can construct these narratives that are lofty sounding, but that are still like, there's a complete disconnect between the audience. Like, you can have this UFO audience just like, giving you applause to everything you say, but both your concepts of UFOs couldn't be more distant, more far apart. And if but you for some reason unable to bring yourself to say like, no, I don't believe in little green men. I believe in just, objects in the sky that we have no explanation for. And I feel like Jordan Peterson has a difficult time to, like, for the analogy of saying that, to telling this crowd that he doesn't actually believe in little green men. He just believes in unidentified objects in the sky. But the crowd is still thinking that he's supporting little green men. See what I mean? Like that's sort of, for maybe not perfect analogy, that's where I see like a disconnect between him and his, at least a portion of his audience, because again, I've never heard anyone speak about God and Christianity the way Jordan Peterson does. He's got this parish of one thing going for him. And yeah, I mean, I like his version way better. Like if I could turn every Christian into like a Jordan Peterson Christian, like I think that would be a good thing. But I don't think it's the best thing, I suppose.
For me, one of the real moments of all the talks came at the end of the first session when Sam, because I think Sam was really motivated. Well, they had 4 sessions, so but really in some ways the climax came at the end of session 1 when Sam, similar to what you just described here, the sense, I think you laid it out, that there's a whole group of people, many of whom subscribe to my channel, who listen to Jordan Peterson and say, well, deep down, he's really one of us and he's not one of them. And so he's on our side. And then Sam watching this, I don't know if you saw it, there's an interesting video done by a YouTuber named Mouthy Buddha, who had a video basically why Jordan Peterson is taking over Sam Harris's fan base, which is it was put out something like June of 2018, which Mouthy Buddha, and actually Mouthy Buddha really loves conspiracy theories. A lot of his videos are about little green UFOs and all of this stuff, but he's very interesting. He's an atheist, but he's a very interesting YouTuber.
You just send me that link when you're after this or something.
Yeah, it's a very interesting video. But for me, I got into. I think I've talked now to lots of people, hundreds and hundreds of hours about Jordan Peterson and why they're interested in it. I've talked to atheists and religious people. I've talked to a lot of people who were atheists and are kind of become God curious. This has happened through the Jordan Peterson thing. I think a lot of what Sam, towards the end of that first one, Sam basically says, you're giving aid and comfort to people who believe in little green men. And maybe you should stop it. And at one point, in fact, in that video, Sam Harris really pins Jordan Peterson down about why don't you say almost certainly not about the resurrection? And he kind of keeps pushing Peterson, and then Peterson says it, and he says, you win, Sam. But of course, they're going to talk for another 6 hours and on from that. And for me, the key moment of that was when Sam Harris asked Jordan Peterson, well, tell me what God you believe in. And then Jordan Peterson reads these rather esoteric points. And then Sam Harris says, no, that's not what people think about when they talk about God. Yeah. And then then they have the very interesting God who cares whether or not you masturbate. And so Peterson, and that's where I got in my videos of this God number 1 and God number 2, because Peterson has this axiomatic God that is built into our filters that helps us navigate the world as a form for action. And then Harris has this, denial of an anti-masturbation God, who is a guy who lives on a cloud and has a rather simplistic filter in terms of, these are the things I want to see people, these are the things I don't. So when I see people doing things I don't want them to do, I'll punish them either with hell or just, give them cancer or annoying children or ugly feet or something like that while they're here. And for me, that was probably the most interesting part of it, because what it showed me was, here's a thesis I have. Most of us don't know what on earth is going on, even inside of ourselves. And we get attracted to people or ideas based on things other parts of our brain are reading, but our consciousness doesn't necessarily get the memo. And so part of the reason I got interested in Jordan Peterson was I saw a lot of people begin to be curious about the Bible and God and Christianity when they weren't before. And so my question was, what's going on with that? Why are they, what is Jordan Peterson saying that is eliciting this phenomenon out in the world?
Yeah.
And so I just got interested in that, and then I made a video, and people started watching my videos, which kind of surprised me. And I just have kept making videos since then. So, so when I watched the videos, I think Sam came there wanting to make the point that you just made very well. I think, in fact, you made it better than Sam did, because your illustration gives a nice format to it, that Sam wanted Jordan to start giving aid and comfort to people who believe in little green men. And I think Jordan had a different goal. I think even though he and Sam, well, you know, and when Jordan tells Sam, and earlier had told Matt Dillahunty that he doesn't really act like an atheist, of course, Sam got upset because, well, what do you mean I don't act like an atheist? I say I'm an atheist and I don't go to church. Well, Jordan doesn't go to church either. So that then got interesting, because, of course, Jordan has this idea of God, which is, then I had to kind of distinguish it and figure out where the difference lies. And that's where I had God number one and God number two. So Jordan Peterson sort of has God number one, and Sam Harris is always trying to debunk God number two. And then Brett Weinstein was kind of in the middle and listened to Jordan Peterson and said, okay, I think I kind of understand what you mean by God.
Yeah.
So
I let's see where to jump in here. Why do you think Jordan Peterson uses the word God to describe what he's talking about? Because in my view, like I usually try to not use the word, just because it has it's just laden with so much historical baggage. There's a lot of baggage to the term, where if you say I believe in God, like everyone around you is going to have a different idea of what that means, and so everyone's going to think that you mean what they mean. Like I remember when I was an undergrad, I had a philosophy, someone who's an undergrad at Berkeley for philosophy. So we would just had a lot of good conversations. He was raised as a Christian, and he would say that he believed in God. But through when we'd go round and round, he'd always distill it back down. And his definition of God was just like at the core was just something like value. Like he believes in value. And I remember saying that, like, well, I mean, I think things have value. I believe in value. So I mean, like I don't have a problem with that. And then we had a guest over who was more of a fundamentalist Christian, who had more of a literalist interpretation of God. And she came over, and she was talking with someone else, and she mentioned that, you know, she's a believer. She believes in God. And I remember my friend looked at her and just kind of said, like, oh, me too. And then they shared like a nod, and they acted like they were on the same page. And I just remember I even said something. I was like, you guys don't agree on anything. Like, like this is like, you could not be further away from what you guys believe on this. And so that's why I don't like using the word God. I just say, I want you to just explain what it is you mean when you say God. But then I feel like so many people then just like want to just shoehorn in and just say, no, but that's God. Like, well, how many other people are we going to allow to say, like, no, this is God, no, this is? in this context. Whereas for Jordan Peterson's God, like I don't see how it contradicts a notion of just, innate, evolved senses of behaviors and motivations. Like we know that, we know that things like desire to have sex is separable from, the desire to procreate. Like, people use contraceptive, but they still have the desire to procreate. Is that desire to have sex, is that God that's doing that? But that can be explained in another context of just, evolutionary psychology, where we have these evolved, mental capacities that are going to give us certain drives to do certain things that are going to be conducive to our survival. And yeah, I feel like this is what Jordan Peterson's, in a sense, is his idea of God. It's just like this selection among generations for, the hierarchies of leadership and everything like that. And then it creates sort of like this ultimate, King of Kings version in your head. And then he'll lay a layer of Christian symbolism over that, when to me it's just like, you don't need the symbol, just talk about the evolutionary psychology of it. And that's why I don't like how Jordan Peterson has this new definition that he calls that God. Like, what do you think is the utility of Jordan Peterson calling it God? Because I just see it as a sort of a placebo effect for instilling good behavior in people in a way. So I want to know what you might think about all that.
Well, the thing that struck me when I heard Sam Harris say that what Jordan Peterson was describing cannot be associated with this word God, or it's improper to associate it with historically, the thing that I immediately saw was that Sam Harris doesn't know much history. Because what happened, sort of what's been happening is that as people slowly leave Christendom, they tend to split into two tracks. One of those tracks tends to be pantheistic, and the other track tends to be atheistic. Okay? And of course, the biggest track is kind of spiritual, but not religious-y. But, that's kind of how they split. And that's actually an important split, because when there was a Verizon commercial a few years ago with a woman named Lisa, and she was walking around and she's talking to the universe. And the universe was saying, "Hey, Lisa, get a new phone." And then she sees a Verizon store, and she goes in and she gets a crappy LG phone. And she says, "Thanks, universe." And what's interesting is that in terms of the language game we're playing, universe there has replaced God. Okay? Now, that's a very interesting thing, because...
What do you think is particularly interesting about that?
Because she could easily be talking to God, and everyone would know what she's doing, because God has these two, historically, the Christian God has these two aspects. His transcendence, which is kind of like a conscious being who is above, watching, impacting, reacting. That's the God that Sam Harris recognizes. Someone who is above, looking down, impacting, has concerns, has all of these aspects of personhood and consciousness and identity. So I call that God number two.
Okay, and real quick, do you think that God number two is the God that most people believe in? In my experience, I would say yes, but I don't have stats on that. I mean, I know that they've had stats on people and their belief in angels and an afterlife, and that seems to be maybe whether or not they think prayers are answered, and those tend to be pretty high. So I'd be interested if you think is that what people are. That seems to be what I care mostly
about. Right now, I would say yes. Right now, the further we've gotten away from Darwin, because one of Jordan Peterson's favorite books is The Metaphysical Club, in which he walks through. He makes the observation that what changed with Darwin was not so much Darwin didn't invent evolution. Darwin popularized the idea that you didn't need a built-in God in creation to result in this amazing environment that we see.
Yeah, he got the natural mechanism, basically. Yeah.
Right. And when we say natural, we mean something without mind or intention.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's where, the intelligent design, that's exactly why there's that line there. So when we use the word natural, we mean without mind or intention.
Yeah.
That happens after Darwin. And so what happens historically after Darwin is that the West has so much sunk capital into God and Christianity. Philosophers and theologians keep trying to rescue God from his lost job in terms of maintaining the creation. Okay? Mm-hmm. And so actually, philosophically, before that, there was another step called providential deism, when you had the clockmaker universe, where you had Newton and a bunch of the early scientists of his, where you basically said, here's God and here's the world.
Mm-hmm.
Before that, if you read theology like the confessional statements of my particular religious tradition, you have a lot of ideas that say things like, if God were to remove himself from this world for a moment, everything would disappear.
Hmm.
Now, that's obviously before providential deism, where the world kind of stands on its own, and God is sort of another being in the world that interacts with it. That's very much the thing that Sam Harris is complaining about. But before providential deism, you have all of this language, like out of the New Testament, where the Apostle Paul says, quoting a pagan philosopher, in him we live and move and have our being. And it's sort of like, if, let's imagine, J.R.R. Tolkien is, making up a story about a hobbit and telling it to his children. And, one evening when J.R.R. Tolkien is telling his children about the hobbit, and Tolkien has never told anybody else outside of his family this cute little story about the hobbit, and then a bomb goes off, maybe the Germans dropped one, and his whole family is destroyed, then Bilbo is no more.
Hmm.
And in a sense, that is also a part of the definition of God historically and beyond Christianity as well. This gets really complicated.
Would you say that definition is more just like a will to live or something like that? I mean, in terms of Bilbo, that's kind of what we mean when we say, like, Bilbo was no more. Like, he had no reason to continue on because everything he loved was killed,
well,
right?
Bilbo is no more because Tolkien is killed, and anyone who Tolkien told about Bilbo is dead.
Okay, I got you.
And so then Bilbo is no more. In other words, part of Bilbo's existence is dependent upon Tolkien. And that's a part of the idea of God too, which is something that Sam Harris continues to not be aware of. Because he's so set into this, he's so set into his location in history. When he talks about God, he's not aware of how all that other stuff is built into the programming. Which is why Lisa, when she says, even though we assume that Verizon Lisa never goes to church, might be spiritual but not religious, she's having a conversation with the universe, because the universe has been directing her path to the Verizon store to get this new cell phone.
Hmm. So when you're discussing these different the ways that religion had been practiced, going back in different time periods. So I understand that, the way that religion had been practiced sort of around the texts has been different. There's there's been, the scriptures, you have the Old Testament and New Testament or whatever, and those have been the static bits, at least before, after they came together in one book. And the religion as a social thing that people have practiced, those practices have changed around the book, but the book still acts as sort of as an anchor, I think, if you will, where things, things can float away from the text, but the text still has a certain sort of gravity to it. And the things that pull people, further away from the text are influenced by when another orbiting body is sort of introduced. Say that, let's say different updated views on morality or something like that. People don't want to stone gay people anymore, things like that. And so there's this greater cultural process that's going. It's a conversation that's sort of away from the scriptures themselves, that's introducing a certain gravitational pull in a different direction away from the text. So what I think that Harris is usually against when people are promoting something like Christianity is they're also promoting this anchor, the gravitational force of something where if the gravity becomes great enough to pull you in, it basically pulls you back into the Iron Age, to the morals that are in the book, that many of them we can identify thanks to a lot of what I would call moral progress since then, that we now correctly identify as bad passages and ways that we should not treat people. And so this is what I think, and this is what I think Sam also thinks, is this is the danger of sort of bolstering Christian narratives, specifically Christian narratives, and then imbuing them with a sort of, that it's not just a book that has a lot of profound things, and you can't read it like Plato. It's to be read more deeper than Plato. It's not written by a person. It's the inspired words of God. And so because of that, it's read like no other book that's being read. And there are dangers for that gravity to take over, especially in times, if times get incredibly rough. If, I'm imagining World War III and people are in despair, well, what's the node that they're going to be pulled back to in these in darker times when there's not much to grab onto? Well, it's going to be this thing that's maybe not the place and time we want to be constantly dragged back to. And so I'm for religion being practiced differently, and I think the history is very interesting over time, and how cultural forces shape the way that people sort of behave around the text and how they drift away from it. I would just, I guess my main thing is that with Sam Harris is I just wish that wasn't just like the stake in the ground, the anchor point that people have, what I would view as a danger of being sucked back into, and can be sucked back into in the here and now. I mean, there are religious fundamentalists today who are essentially believing like very literal interpretations of it. And we see it in other religions too, such as Islam and things like that.
Well, why do you think gay people shouldn't be stoned?
Well, I think if we sort of based just on the social behavior, if we're a social species, we realize that our consciousness isn't just, well, we have our own perception of around us. We don't like to be hurt and feeling pain. We've evolved certain moral sentiments that are more conducive to our survival and well-being, conducive to happiness in that way, where if certain of these rules are violated, we can sort of realize that we wouldn't want to be subject to these same rules, where we're going to be stoned due to, properties that we had no control over, such as sexual preference. And so we can sort of, the fact that we can put ourselves in other people's minds, we can then say that we wouldn't this to be done to ourselves in a certain way. and that this isn't a conducive thing to a functioning society, and where everyone can, not have to look over their shoulder constantly about who's gonna come there with a bucket full of rocks and start throwing it at them.
And you would agree that one good rule of thumb generally is that we should treat other people the way we ourselves want to be treated.
Yes.
Which is also in the Bible.
Yes. But, so what I say to that too is that, again, these I think can be explained by these evolved moral sentiments that we have that are conducive to our well-being. Like, it's no coincidence that something like that showed up in the Bible, because this is something that people have within them already. Like, things that people come across, like really good moral rules like that, well, they're really impactful to people. Like, when we hear them, they have a big impact, and we're like, hey, that really resonates with us. Well, we can't control what resonates with us, but the reason these things do resonate so well is because they basically are of the structure that we have evolved in our brains, where it's a rule that we're unconsciously going by. But that's the process of, social evolution, consciousness. And so to me, it makes perfect sense that rules like, do not kill, treat others how you want to be treated, that these would find their way into a canon of some sort, because yeah, they do resonate with us, but they resonate with us for a really good reason, because these reflect real structures that we've gained in our minds through evolution. So that's how I interpret at least those types of.
So two things found their way into the canon. One said stone gay people, and the other said treat people the way you want to be treated. How do you know which one is good, or which one should be kept and which one should be dropped?
Yeah, so I think this is a process that we sort of arrive at through certain trial and error. So I think there's going to be a conflicting, there's going to be a conflict between some baser instincts that we have of things like disgust and repulsion that we have, and that people initially don't like. Like if I stumble across gay porn, like I'm not gay and it's not appealing to me, and so I've grown up in a society where we're just we can be like these people shouldn't be stoned, they can do what they want to do. But in the past, I think it's somewhat understandable that breaking of certain norms that we've evolved to do would probably be reinforced through certain barbaric acts like killing gay people, for instance. But over time, and in different contexts, when we come to know more and more about our environments, about the nature of our minds and how societies function, and what type of rules we wouldn't want to be subject to, if you take like a Rawlsian veil of ignorance type thing, would we want to live in a society where if we were a gay person, would we want to roll the dice and live in a society that would stone gay people? I don't think people would choose that. So human nature is a mixture of these reptilian instincts that we have that are tribalistic, that are bigoted, that are violent. But then there's also these evolved moral sentiments that we have to our in-group that are really good, like reciprocity, taking care of other people's young, all these good and bad things. And so there's going to be a tension there between what's going to be conducive to survival as we move forward, and as we kind of broaden our social context to others that aren't in our close tribe, I suppose. And so I think morality kind of progresses as we learn more about the behaviors that are conducive to well-being of people, if that makes any sense.
Well, the stoning gay people certainly was also an evolved a norm that evolved through time, wouldn't have been?
Maybe not like the specific act, but like general aggression towards maybe certain aberrant behaviors that people, didn't understand, and may have, there also could be layers of stories over that too that are causing people to do certain behaviors as well that maybe aren't totally, evolved. But yeah, I mean, it's aggression towards certain aberrant behaviors is likely involved.
Well, we could pretty easily construct a story that would explain why a tribe would stone gay people, couldn't we?
I suppose you probably maybe could, but I think it's the process over time is when we start adding more context and we learn more about just our relation to others in general and how we'd want to be treated.
Well, let's think, for example, in the Bronze Age, early Iron Age Israel, really all the way up until the modern period, the hero of the tribe was the woman who bears, many sons. And she's the hero of the tribe because the woman who bears many sons means that the tribe has more sons, more men, and the tribe having more sons and more men, these sons and men can go out into the fields and they can work on the farm and they can produce more food. And then they can also compete against the rival tribes who are, always looking to come and raid their food and steal the women and children. And so the value in the tribe is obviously towards, producing a large group of strong men. And we would imagine if that quality and characteristic is necessary for the survival of the tribe and the group, that anything which threatens that behavior would be known as bad. And so therefore, it would be reasonable if the goal was the flourishing of the tribe in competition with other tribes, that you would stone usually gay men. Because these having a large group of gay men is problematic for over long periods of time, multiple generations. Tribes that stoned gay men outperformed tribes that didn't stone gay men, let's say. And so, I mean, whether or not this is true, I don't know, but we could certainly construct a story that would say, within this context, there's a value of stoning gay people.
Yeah, so I think what we're looking at is sort of a difference between what is sort of, I guess, useful in an evolutionary sense of like competing tribes and ones that are going to be more likely to be, to reproduce more and overtake other tribes or something. All these evolutionary dynamics that we would expect to create like a more dominant society. And I'm not saying that we're going to evolve the best tendencies that we're going to look at now, but I think we have sort of a benefit in the present of not being in a time where the only thing that I'd say, that matters is sort of this unthinking rules of thumb that have gotten people, had them outcompete other groups in a certain way. So I'm not a person that thinks that like morality is something that's out there, like it's not wrong to the universe and to the rocks and to the stars. Like morality is basically exists only among conscious minds, and particularly among conscious minds of our types. I mean, there could exist maybe other I don't know how spider societies get along. If they were conscious, they might have different rules and different things that create well-being for a certain society with different brains and different types of societies. But at least our species, now that we're kind of, not in a position where survival is the utmost important thing, that these evolved traits that we can now sort of step back and look at these and analyze these things in a way that we have time to analyze them. But back in the day, there's no time to just like ponder on a couch about like the way we should treat things and the best way to set up a society, like that Rawls did, for instance. And we can expand, and now that we live in environments too where we expand our notion of what a tribe is to other people that's around us, and we can sort of I guess, more critically reflect on the behaviors that we have evolved that may not be applicable to, the present time. If that makes any sense.
Well, our tribes are more ideological, and I don't know that we're any less competitive between ideological tribes than we were. Our battles. Well, so you've got the social justice warriors over here, and you've got the creation scientists over here, and you've got the Quillette tribe over here. And fortunately, at least at this point, we're not deciding we want to rule the kingdom by killing everyone else. I mean, we've certainly done that plenty.
Yeah, I think that's an update.
I think it's an update. So that's a good thing. But at the same time, we're also living in a period of unprecedented abundance, where, unlike, let's say, Bronze Age, early Iron Age Israel, where it was very much a matter of life and death. In that situation, if you didn't have enough men to counter the Philistines or the Midianites or the Amorites, if you didn't have enough men in your tribe, you were, the Bible's just full of those stories, and anthropology is full of those stories, which makes some of the people you're talking to quite ironic, because I think, how much anthropology do they really know in terms of history, in terms of what people actually do when they are in various contexts and situations, and therefore the norms that they follow.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we necessarily are going to continue down a path of moral progress. I mean, as soon as, the resources run out or something and it creates a panic, I mean, people are going to go back to complete chaos. I mean, it's definitely, we are at a luxury of being in a time of abundance where we can think more reflectively upon the best ways to treat individuals that we might not have had that luxury, back in the day when your infant mortality rates were through the roof and you don't know if you're going to get raided by another tribe the next day. So I think that's why I'm really afraid of a lot of the postmodern deconstructionists, is because once we move too far away from the facts, I know it's something that Peterson and Harris both think, we devolve into a state of cultural relativism. Well, I don't want that either. I really like that part of their talk where they talked about the different poles of relativism, complete chaos, and then, the Bible being something that's, just a complete order, if you will. So I agree that we want to avoid both of those things. And so I'm concerned with, as I mentioned before, using, having the Bible be that anchor, because that's just a snapshot of our moral progress up until that point, until it was written down in a book, and then that's the way it stayed. But maybe if that book didn't get codified, until now or something like that, then the gravitational pull would be in a spot that is maybe better, because I think if you removed some passages of the Bible, it would maybe be a document that I would be happier to use as an anchor for society, for instance. But then people could also say there were maybe forms before the current Bible that they might have wanted to use as the anchor back then that had even more barbaric things. So the Bible could be an updated version of what used to be, oral traditions or something.
Progress, though, is a really tricky thing, because, for example, what you would argue in terms of science, someone could easily say, well, that view of science reigned basically from the 19th to 20th century, but here in the 21st century, moral progress dictates that we know that you, being a straight white male, that you have ingrown biases which prejudice the way you see the world. And we now know this. I mean, they certainly feel that they know this as surely as you and I feel that we know what we know. And they call their transition progress. I mean, they literally do.
They're progressives.
And they're progressives. And you say, now, wait a minute. we learned all these things, and we learned all these patterns, and all of these patterns worked really well for our society. And in fact, our society has been able to achieve what it has because we have practiced science without these other external, what practically look like religious biases that you are imposing from your social justice ideology. So in a sense, you've also got what would fundamentally be seen by the progressives to be a conservative dogma that is retarding the advance of their progress.
You say the conservative dogma is the new progressivism type thing?
No. You're the conservative.
Yes,
Yes.
I am what it is, for sure.
And you're the conservative, and you hold dogmas like, well, you shouldn't, the best scientists should win, and that should be based on facts and data, and, you should leave ideological biases out of it. And so, in other words, and so perhaps, I don't know if we would say Francis Bacon wrote your Bible, or, someone wrote your Bible, but your Bible then is, in a sense, a weight or a drag or an attempt to have a fixed point that relativizes the so-called new findings of this group. And obviously what was so dramatic about the hoax papers was that it basically exposed the new findings to be just, I forget what somebody in my meetup called it, woozling, just kind of going round and round the tree. You get enough scholars to agree with it, and it's a fact.
Yeah, they perfectly closed the loop on that machine that just pumps out that nonsense. Yeah.
And so here is, in a sense, how one way that you might imagine the Bible is operating. Because, well, let's take a look at, not that I certainly would critique it, but let's take Jordan Peterson's understanding of what the Bible is and why he still reads it. He understands what the Bible to be is encoded wisdom from, hundreds of generations that has been sourced over many, many different contexts in a whole variety of ways and places, and kind of distilled into mythological, symbolic, rule-based forms. And what that does is basically always give our ancestors a voice in our perception of values and the reality of this world. And that is something that is, now here's the thing, it's in a book. You're free to close it and ignore it or listen to it. That in fact is a very useful tool if you're moving into realms of the unknown. And I would argue for the fact that I've been a minister for now over 20 years, and we've yet to stone our first gay person. They just get in and out the door, and I don't say, why don't we stop them and stone them? We're not stoning gay people, and there actually is. I mean, you talk about what the Bible is, where you can find some people that Sam Harris is thinking about. You've got Westboro Baptist Church. Even they aren't stoning gay people, as far as I know, or they'd all be in jail. But there's actually a huge amount of very reasonable process that goes along with this book. And in fact, all of what's happening in religion in America is usually a great deal of conversation and debate and reasoning and all of those things that get built into what one might think about, if you were thinking about it in terms of Jordan Peterson's terms, as a way of saying our perspective on the world is based on this tiny little window. And there have been smart people throughout human history that have faced a myriad of challenges, and they have distilled wisdom down into certain forms that have been tested throughout history in unimaginable ways. And what we actually have now is the record of all of this. And now let's bring God back into it. When you think about, when you think about God in terms of my Frodo Tolkien story, God, in fact, has his fingerprints all over, God number one has his fingerprints all over this entire process. It actually makes a great deal of sense when we start trying to figure out, well, how should we regard various behaviors? What did our ancestors say?
Mm-hmm.
Did they, here's always a fun question. When the pilgrims landed in Massachusetts, what should the tribes have done?
Yeah, it's tricky. Maybe they
should have killed them.
Yeah.
But it always depends on.
In hindsight, we know that they should have just kept launching arrows.
But we also know that, of course, then you read someone like Jared Diamond. Have you ever read Guns, Germs, and Steel?
I did a long time ago. Yeah.
So, fascinating book, why they had no natural immunity and why the germs and blah, 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 and all that happened. And of course, the pilgrims landed and the local groups said, this group might be useful in terms of our competition with the other groups. What they, of course, couldn't have known was that there's an entire world out there that has all of their own stories, and they're just going to keep coming, even though they, the view from the Indians is that, these white people, they don't know how to live. They're really stupid. They die like crazy. They suffer horribly. And so basically, let's just kind of keep them alive. And if our own little political winds change, then we can always just stop feeding them and they'll just croak anyway. So, it really was a very rational perspective that they had in terms of dealing with these strangers that came over the ocean. It was very rational. But what they lacked, obviously, from our point of view, was a far bigger picture. And so really what Bible and religion give you is a far larger picture on the world than what the rationality of usually a very tiny window can offer. So that would be an argument. That would be a rationalist argument for religion.
Yeah, and I could almost agree with all of that. Like I'm not the person who wants to just throw out the Bible. I think in a part of a lot of what Jordan Peterson and Harris talked about is like, we gotta distinguish the baby from the bathwater. And the problem is, like, well, how much baby is in there? How much bathwater? Can you take the baby out of it without killing it? It's an issue. And I think if I had to choose between, say, like the gravity of the Bible and the gravity of complete chaos, basically complete just deconstruction, cultural relativism, everything, I'd probably pick the Bible, because there's at least some good true things in there that people can latch onto that are going to be aligning with their evolved moral sentiments that can be kickstarted to potentially do something good from that. It's a point in time. It might not be the point in time that I think is like the best point in time to stick a pin in it and say, like, that's where this is where we're gonna have the anchor. But there could be, I think, worse anchors for sure.
Go back to what the Mayans thought.
Yeah, and so I do see the utility in having a document that has received wisdom from thousands and thousands of years. I think we should take the Bible very seriously. I think we should have updated conversations about what things we want to parse and which things are going to be we should believe, but they shouldn't be believed based on just the dogma, but there needs to be some sort of rational argument for things that are in the Bible as well. but yeah, I think that it's definitely has usefulness, and I wouldn't throw the whole thing out just because I don't think it's the best thing that there is. I think it can be extremely useful for a lot of people, and so yeah, I think that's a good rationalist argument for it. There's just a lot of spin-off problems when you get people that are just gonna go back to fundamentalism at any moment. I mean, who knows? In 1,000 years, we could be stoning gay people again. Like, I don't know.
Maybe we'll eat them. I don't know.
Maybe. Like, we're gonna wax and wane with how close we get to and from the text. And the problem is, like, we need to stay, I would hope, far enough away from it as we can, where we can, not be drawn back to the parts that we can kind of come to a consensus agreement that are not the way that we want to treat other people. But we're not going to just float off into oblivion. Like, that's something we can't do.
Well, I'd actually argue that you probably want to keep the fundamentalist around, and for this reason, that what happens is you have the Bible here, and that doesn't change, and you have all these communities around the Bible that see it as authoritative and are always working on it. But you'll notice that even though all of these communities recognize the Bible as authoritative, and they're all reading it and working on it, they're all coming out of it with different ideas. And I know a lot of people argue that that just shows the inconsistency of it. See, I don't think so. That shows that there's actually multiple ways of interpreting it and then expressing it. And if you're thinking about human beings as an ecosystem, and you're thinking about us learning by watching each other and gathering information, it's really a good thing that you have the Amish, who are obviously fundamentalists by any standard, who are living this crazy lifestyle in horse and buggies and doing organic farming way before organic farming was ever fashionable to do, and are making really nice quilts and pies and all of this. And so what you actually have around religious communities are all these really interesting tiny test cases of ways to live life. Because part of what's really fascinating, even about conservative religious communities, that if you go there and say, well, you haven't changed since the 1950s. Well, actually, they've all changed since the 1950s, because the context has changed, and they're also not only continually trying to stay connected with this authoritative text, they're also having to make their life work out in the world. And so what you really get is a nice group of diverse experiments on how to live, being informed by our ancestral past, interfacing with the contemporary world, and figuring out what works and what doesn't. And what we know from biology, especially in terms of our food supply and some of the concerns about it, is these monocultures. Let's say we'll give Sam Harris a magic wand, and he can make the Bible disappear, and all these religious communities will run around like ants that you've destroyed the trail and they don't know where to go. And actually, that's one of the dumbest things you can think of, because you've got all of these groups running these experiments in terms of how to live with respect to the wisdom of the past. And what you see is that over time, some of these communities flourish, and we learn things about flourishing from them, and others of these communities disappear. And usually they don't flourish or disappear in the animal kingdom by just all dying, but people actually enter, they either leave or enter those communities. And so I would argue that even from a rationalist perspective, even from a materialist perspective, it makes a whole lot of sense to have these religious people voluntarily trying all kinds of ways to live. And I think this is part of the reason why freedom of conscience and religion in America proved to be such a flourishing space for religions, that you actually had all of this experimentation in how human beings should live. And what's also really cool about religious communities is they keep records. They write their stuff down. They write theology and books. So actually, most of the records we have about how humans can live throughout most of history, they're almost all religious records. So, and then if you would say, okay, I'm a scientist, I'm going to study this, but to study all of that diversity, what I'd really love to have is sort of a constant. And what you actually have from that is, in fact, a constant, which is the constant text of the Bible that a good number of these communities, at least the ones that, say, Jared Diamond would draw from his world story, would all be connected to this text. And so if let's imagine, now let's give the simulation argument that's due. Let's imagine we're living in a simulation. I would very much imagine that if they're running a simulation and they want to see what human beings do, we need a constant. Let's give them the Bible and let's watch all of the things that happen with respect to that. So to me, it's really a fascinating thing to imagine.
No, I totally agree with the utility of, having the different experiments being run. And I think there could be good arguments that you need maybe that some anchoring text that's been imbued with some profundity is a good thing to some degree. But it's, at the end of the day, there are still, I think there could be better versions of a book that we look at with profundity. And I think we shouldn't ever look at something with, they should be profound, and they should be books that we would pass on and say that they're imbued with such wisdom, and that we should take these books very seriously. But then to go the extra step and say that these things, well, they were inspired by some, the actual creator of the universe, and then some of the passages may not be the best anchor, the best starting point that you want to have to start these experiments on. I mean, I think there could be updated versions that would be a better place to go. I think there's probably some changes that you could, if there's a 2.0, if you could go and make some edits and use that as the starting place, I think that would be preferable to what we have now, for sure.
Well, I'd argue that people have been doing that all along. When Thomas Jefferson took his scissors and cut out all the pieces, and in fact, just about every time someone writes a nonfiction book with a tone of admonishment, they're in fact throwing their hat into the ring to say, here's some, and even when people, especially when people are writing theology, I mean, that's essentially what they're doing. They're taking this book and they're saying, this is my read on this book from the 18th, 19th, 20th, or 21st century. And then the really interesting question, though, is if you would think that there's a book that articulates better adaptation than the book that we've got, that book would eventually outcompete the Bible. And in fact, I mean, you might argue that the Book of Mormon, Islam, various cults that start, the difficulty that we have, I think, especially in our culture, is we're so individualistic that our frame of reference is a good life for a human being, which only lives a certain amount of time, and that the books that are actually competing for this are books that, and it makes good sense, books that actually prove their value, again, over a huge diversity of cultures, framed both by cultures contemporaneously and cultures throughout time. So, one could argue if the human race is around for another 10,000 years, everybody's then, reading this as their Bible, according to this thought experiment. I'd probably
prefer that, maybe. Yeah.
The Bible's a lot more fun. I mean, there aren't enough stories in this book. I mean, you don't have...
Which is surprising, given Jordan Peterson's like of stories and narratives.
That's right.
I've only read parts of it, but I haven't. I should probably try to make my way and slog through it, but... Well... It's like a daunting task.
My word for it is it's a tortured book. He says, I poured over every sentence 15 times, and I think, yeah, it reads that way. You might have trusted.
You to go with your first go is going to be the best.
That's right. That's right. Well, I don't know, Colin, do you have any, we've got about 2 hours. That's a pretty good amount of time. Do you have any last things you want to throw in there? This has been delightful for me.
That was a lot of fun.
I hope I didn't lean in on you too hard with all of my religious dogma.
Oh no, I love these conversations. I live in Pennsylvania by myself, and I don't know anybody out here, so I'm thrilled to like do podcasts and talk with people about things that I think are interesting. So
wonderful, wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely.
So anything you want to promote? You got your Quillette piece, and I can put the link to that in. Do you want me to put your Twitter handle in this? Yeah,
you can follow me at Swipe Right, WRIGHT, my last name. About it. That's all I got going on.
Is that a Tumblr reference or a?
I guess it's like a Tinder or a Bumble, or if there's any type of, swiping dating app. I was shocked that it was available on Twitter when I signed up for it. I've only been on Twitter since the middle of last year, so I'm surprised it wasn't taken. So it's got lucky there.
Has it gotten many girls for you?
Nope.
Oh, well.
I have a girlfriend back in California, so.
Back in Cal. Oh, yeah. The whole distance romance thing.
Rough.
Yeah, that's hard. That's hard. Anyway.
It is what it is.
But this is, I'm so glad you said yes. I mean, we had that little exchange on Twitter. I thought, he could be fun to talk to this guy. I'm surrounded by way too many people that agree with me, even though I have a meetup of all people who have zero in agreeableness because they just love to fight.
Yeah, so. I think I try to be as agreeable as possible. And, if you ever want to do it again, I'd be happy to talk about something else if you'd like, or whatever. I'm open.
Well, wonderful. Well, if you think of something that's kind of religious-y and you think, I want to talk to a pastor about this, just let me know. Then we'll do it again.
Awesome. That sounds good.
Well, this has been a pleasure, Colin, and I'll post this. I might post this tomorrow because this is, I think the people who watch my channel, a lot of people really enjoy this. So
cool. I think I know my parents want to watch it, so they watch all my podcasts. It's in a fun way.
Do you have your own podcast or just when you guest on podcasts?
I've been thinking about it, but I haven't quite gotten there yet.
Okay.
We'll see. I think I need to get more comfortable doing podcasts and just getting, talking in front of a camera because, I've been trying to record like audio papers, like reading my papers, just audio version so people can like listen to scientific papers. It's kind of like a concept I'm trying to like get out there. And sometimes I get like stage fright just talking to my microphone in my room. I was just like, this makes no sense.
I take it from me, it's a little weird talking to your computer all by yourself, and I do it all the time. So
yeah, I don't know how people do it, but maybe it's definitely something I'm considering. But we'll see how that goes.
Very cool. Okay, Colin. Well, you have a good evening.
You have a good one too. Okay. Nice chatting.
Good chatting with you. Bye-bye.
Bye.